The morning sun cast long shadows across Oak Ridge Heights as Officer James Reynolds began his patrol. It was a quiet Tuesday in the affluent neighborhood, with only the occasional jogger or dog walker breaking the stillness of the tree-lined streets. Reynolds had been assigned to this beat for just over 3 months, and he still felt like an outsider among the sprawling homes and manicured lawns. He drove slowly down Maple Avenue, scanning the surroundings with practiced eyes. This wasn't his usual neighborhood. He typically worked in the busier downtown area, but budget cuts had stretched the department thin. The radio crackled with routine chatter as he turned onto Cedar Street, his coffee growing cold in the cup holder. Dispatch to Unit 37. We've got a report of a suspicious person in the Oak Ridge area. Resident called about someone who doesn't belong in the neighborhood. No description provided. Reynolds grabbed his radio. Unit 37 responding. I'm already in Oak Ridge. Any more details? Negative, Officer Reynolds. Just a concerned resident saying someone was looking at houses who doesn't live around here. Reynolds sighed. These calls were becoming more frequent in Oak Ridge. Vague reports that often amounted to nothing more than residents uncomfortable with unfamiliar faces in their exclusive enclave. Still, he had to respond. 3 blocks away, Judge Elaine Wright was finishing her morning jog. At 52, she maintained a strict exercise routine, running 5 miles every morning before heading to the federal courthouse downtown. The familiar weight of her house keys jingled in her pocket as her running shoes hit the pavement in a steady rhythm. Music flowed through her earbuds, drowning out the sounds of the neighborhood she'd called home for 15 years. Elaine hadn't slept well the night before. A difficult case had kept her mind racing, a civil rights violation that hit too close to home. The morning run was her way of clearing her head, preparing for another day of difficult decisions from the bench. She had turned down the volume of her music, letting her thoughts wander as she rounded the corner onto her street. Reynolds spotted her from half a block away, a woman in a gray hoodie and black running pants, moving at a steady pace along the sidewalk. Something about her presence triggered an instant reaction in him. She didn't match his mental image of the neighborhood residents, though he couldn't have explained why. He slowed his patrol car and observed her for a moment, then pulled alongside. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called through the open window. Elaine continued running, the bass of her music filling her ears, her mind still working through the details of her case. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you," Reynolds called louder, a edge creeping into his voice. When she didn't respond, he quickly pulled ahead and parked his car at an angle to the curb, blocking the sidewalk. Elaine slowed her pace, finally noticing the police car. She pulled one earbud out, her breathing slightly heavy from the run. The officer was already out of his vehicle, approaching with one hand resting on his belt. "I've been trying to get your attention," Reynolds said, his tone clipped. "Why didn't you stop when I called to you?" Elaine gestured to her earbuds. "I'm sorry, officer. I didn't hear you." "I was listening to music." Reynolds studied her face, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. What are you doing here?" The question caught Elaine off guard. She'd jogged the same route for over a decade. "I live here," she replied simply, pointing toward her house just 2 doors down. "I'm just finishing my morning run." "I'll need to see some ID," Reynolds demanded, taking a step closer. Elaine felt a flicker of irritation. "I don't carry ID when I run. My house is right there. I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. Reynolds' posture stiffened. "Ma'am, when an officer asks for identification, you're required to provide it." "Actually, that's not correct," Elaine replied calmly, her legal mind automatically engaging. "In this state, I'm not legally obligated to identify myself unless you have reasonable suspicion that I've committed a crime." She kept her voice level, though her heart rate had begun to climb again, no longer from exercise. Something in Reynolds' expression hardened. This woman wasn't showing the deference he expected. The fact that she knew her rights only seemed to aggravate him further. "I do have reasonable suspicion," he insisted. "We received a call about someone who doesn't belong in this neighborhood." "And you immediately assumed that was me?" Elaine asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Based on what exactly?" The air between them grew tense. A few doors down, Mrs. Chen stepped onto her porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the interaction with concern. "Listen," Reynolds said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "I don't appreciate your attitude. I'm doing my job protecting this neighborhood." "From what?" Elaine challenged. From me going for a run on my own street? Put your hands where I can see them, Reynolds ordered, ignoring her question. Elaine raised her hands slightly, feeling a mix of disbelief and growing anger. This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong. Turn around, Reynolds commanded. No, Elaine replied firmly. I will not. I'm going home now. She took a single step toward her house. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Reynolds moved forward, grabbing Elaine's arm. She pulled back instinctively, and he responded with disproportionate force, pushing her hard. Elaine lost her balance, falling backward onto the sidewalk, the impact sending a shock of pain through her hip and elbow. When I give you an order, you comply, Reynolds shouted, standing over her. Now stay down. The fall knocked the wind from Elaine's lungs. For a moment, she couldn't speak, could only stare up at the officer in shock. Across the street, Tom Garcia had stepped out of his car, witnessing the scene in disbelief. He pulled out his phone and began recording. Hey, Tom called out. What are you doing? She didn't do anything. Reynolds spun toward the new voice. Stay back. This is police business. Elaine pushed herself up to a sitting position, wincing at the pain in her elbow. Officer, your badge number is 8349. I want your name. Reynolds turned back to her. Officer James Reynolds. And you're going to give me your name right now, or you're going to jail for obstruction. By this point, 3 neighbors had gathered at a distance, watching in horror. Mrs. Chen had stepped off her porch and was walking quickly toward them. Her name is Judge Wright, Mrs. Chen called out, her voice trembling with indignation. She's lived here longer than I have. Reynolds froze, his expression shifting as the words registered. Judge? Federal Judge Elaine Wright, Elaine confirmed, slowly getting to her feet, ignoring Reynolds' extended hand. Of the Ninth Circuit Court. And you've just made a very serious mistake, Officer Reynolds. The color drained from Reynolds' face. He took a step back, suddenly aware of the growing audience of neighbors, at least 2 of whom were recording the incident on their phones. There was a call about a suspicious person, he stammered, his certainty evaporating. And you decided that was me, Elaine said, brushing dirt from her running clothes. Her voice was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her body. You didn't ask questions. You didn't approach reasonably. You escalated a non-situation into a physical assault. Reynolds glanced around at the watching neighbors, then back at Elaine. His hand moved unconsciously to adjust his body camera. The camera's been recording the whole time, Elaine observed. Good. We'll need that footage. Tom Garcia approached cautiously, still filming. Judge Wright, are you okay? Do you need medical attention? Elaine did a quick mental inventory of her body. Her elbow was scraped and beginning to swell. Her hip throbbed where it had hit the concrete, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the humiliation and violation she felt. I'm going to need incident report forms, she told Reynolds, ignoring Tom's question, and I'll be speaking with your superior today. Reynolds seemed to be shrinking before their eyes, the realization of what he'd done, and to whom, finally sinking in. Judge Wright, I apologize for the misunderstanding. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Elaine cut him off. This was an abuse of power, and we both know it. She turned toward her house, then paused. You can explain to your captain why you felt it necessary to assault a federal judge on her own street. I'm sure the body camera footage will be very educational for everyone involved. As she walked away with as much dignity as her bruised body allowed, Elaine felt the weight of what had just happened settling onto her shoulders. This wasn't just about her. This was about every person who'd ever been profiled, questioned, or harmed, simply for existing in a space someone decided they didn't belong. By tomorrow, this incident would become public. By next week, it would be a case study, but right now, as she climbed the steps to her front door with neighbors watching and Officer Reynolds standing frozen by his patrol car, Elaine Wright was simply a woman trying to hold back tears of rage and pain, determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing them fall. Elaine Wright closed her front door and leaned against it, finally allowing her body to tremble. The pain in her hip and elbow was getting worse, but it was the hot sting of humiliation that brought tears to her eyes. For 30 seconds, she permitted herself this moment of weakness. Then, with a deep breath, she straightened her spine and walked to her kitchen. Outside, Officer Reynolds stood frozen beside his patrol car. The gravity of his actions was sinking in, bringing with it a cold wave of dread. A federal judge. Of all the people he could have confronted, he had knocked down a federal judge. His career flashed before his eyes. 12 years on the force, now potentially over in less than 5 minutes. Tom Garcia approached Reynolds, phone still recording. "I got everything on video from when you pushed her down. Everyone's going to see this." Reynolds swallowed hard. "Sir, I need you to step back." "Why? So you can push me down too?" Tom challenged. By now, 6 neighbors had gathered, keeping a cautious distance. Mrs. Chen was knocking on Judge Wright's door. Reynolds' radio crackled. "Unit 37, what's your status on that suspicious person call?" With a shaking hand, he raised the radio. "Dispatch, send Sergeant Miller to my location. We have a situation." Inside her home, Elaine ignored Mrs. Chen's knocking and went straight to her bathroom. She examined her injuries in the mirror. A scraped elbow with beads of blood forming and what would surely become a nasty bruise on her hip. She took photos with her phone, documenting each injury from multiple angles. Her hands were steady now. 25 years in the legal system had taught her to channel emotion into action. She changed quickly into a casual blouse and slacks, wincing as the fabric brushed against her scrapes. Then she found her federal ID, clipped it to her belt, and pulled out her phone. "Lisa, it's Elaine," she said when her clerk answered. "I won't be in court today. Something's happened." She explained the situation briefly. "I need you to contact the chief of police immediately. Tell him to meet me at my house within the hour." As she hung up, the knocking grew more insistent. Elaine opened the door to find Mrs. Chen, worry etched across her face. "Elaine, are you okay? Should I call an ambulance?" "No ambulance," Elaine replied firmly. "But I would appreciate it if you could email me the video you took." Mrs. Chen looked surprised. "How did you know I recorded it?" "Because I would have done the same," Elaine said with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. 20 minutes later, Sergeant Miller arrived. He found Reynolds standing awkwardly by his vehicle, surrounded by a growing crowd of neighbors. Miller's expression darkened as Reynolds quietly explained what had happened. "You pushed a federal judge to the ground?" Miller hissed, keeping his voice low. "Tell me you're joking." "She wasn't answering my questions," Reynolds tried to explain. "She was being uncooperative." "Stop talking," Miller cut him off. "Right now, before you dig yourself deeper." He turned to address the onlookers. "Folks, we're handling this situation. Please return to your homes. Nobody moved. We're waiting for the chief," Tom Garcia said. "Judge Wright called him." Miller's face paled. "She called the chief directly?" He turned back to Reynolds. "Give me your badge and gun. You're on administrative leave, effective immediately." Reynolds' hand moved protectively to his belt. "Sarge, that's not necessary." "It wasn't a request," Miller said, his voice steel. "Badge and gun. Now." As Reynolds reluctantly handed over his service weapon and badge, a sleek black car pulled up. Chief Robert Daniels stepped out, his face set in grim lines. He was in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and the bearing of someone who expected immediate respect. "Miller." He nodded to the sergeant. "Where is Judge Wright?" "Inside, sir," Miller replied, jerking his head toward the house. "This is Officer Reynolds." The chief barely glanced at Reynolds. "Wait in your car. Do not leave this scene." He walked past the gathered neighbors and up to Elaine's door, knocking firmly. Elaine opened it immediately, standing tall despite the pain in her hip. "Chief Daniels." "Judge Wright," he replied with a slight nod. "May I come in?" She stepped aside to let him enter, then closed the door on the watching crowd. Inside, she led him to her living room but remained standing. "Would you like to tell me why one of your officers assaulted me on my own street this morning?" she asked without preamble. Chief Daniels maintained his professional demeanor. "I'd like to hear your account of what happened, Your Honor." "I think you should see it first," Elaine replied, picking up her tablet. "My neighbor just sent me this." She played the video Tom had taken, which captured the moment Reynolds pushed her to the ground and everything that followed. The chief's expression remained neutral, but his jaw tightened visibly. "This is unacceptable," he said when the video ended. "Officer Reynolds has been relieved of duty pending investigation." "That's not enough," Elaine replied. "This isn't just about me, Robert. You know that." They had known each other professionally for years, serving on several community policing initiatives together. "I understand your position," he began. "No, I don't think you do," Elaine interrupted. "Your officer didn't ask for my ID and then escalate when I couldn't provide it. He saw a black woman in an affluent neighborhood and immediately assumed I didn't belong here. He never asked if I lived here. He demanded identification before stating any reasonable suspicion. When I questioned him, he became aggressive. The chief sighed. Elaine, I'm not defending his actions. What happened was clearly wrong. Then say it, she challenged. Say exactly what was wrong about it. Chief Daniels held her gaze. Officer Reynolds racially profiled you and then used excessive force when you asserted your rights. It was wrong on every level. Elaine nodded, satisfied with his acknowledgement. I want his body cam footage secured immediately. I want access to his record, all complaints, all stops, all arrests. I want to know if this is a pattern. You know I can't just hand over personnel records, the chief replied. You can when they're part of a federal civil rights investigation, Elaine countered, which is what this will become if I don't see meaningful action. Outside, the scene had grown more tense. News had spread quickly through the neighborhood and more residents had gathered. Someone had called local media, and a news van was now pulling up to the curb. Reynolds watched from his patrol car, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. His phone buzzed, a text from his wife. Are you okay? People are posting about something happening with a judge? Reynolds couldn't bring himself to respond. How could he explain that he might have just destroyed everything they'd worked for? Sergeant Miller approached the news van, trying to prevent reporters from setting up. This is an active investigation. We have no comment at this time. But the reporters weren't interested in Miller. They were filming the scene, capturing footage of the gathered neighbors and Reynolds sitting in his patrol car. Inside, Elaine and Chief Daniels became aware of the commotion. The press is already here, Daniels noted, looking out the window. Good, Elaine said. Transparency is exactly what we need right now. Judge Wright, Daniels said carefully. We both know how quickly these situations can spiral. What exactly do you want to happen here? Elaine moved to her desk and winced as she sat down. I want justice, not a media circus. I want systematic change, not just one officer scapegoated while the underlying issues remain. She wrote something on a notepad and handed it to him. These are my immediate requirements. Officer Reynolds suspended without pay pending investigation. All his records preserved and reviewed. An independent investigation of the incident. And a formal public apology from your department acknowledging what actually happened here. The chief read the list and nodded slowly. I can agree to these terms. But you should know Reynolds has a clean record until now. No formal complaints. No formal complaints doesn't mean no complaints, Elaine pointed out. It often just means no complaints that were taken seriously. The chief couldn't argue with that. What will you tell the press? Nothing yet, Elaine replied. I'll give you 48 hours to make your statement first. But then I'll be speaking out, not just as the victim in this case, but as a federal judge who has seen far too many similar cases come before my bench. As the chief prepared to leave, Elaine added, I want to meet him. Reynolds? Daniels asked, surprised. Why? Because I want him to see me as a person, not just as a judge who can ruin his career or a black woman who doesn't belong in his view of my neighborhood. I want him to understand exactly what he did and why it was wrong. Chief Daniels hesitated. That might not be advisable from a legal standpoint. I'm well aware of the legal implications, Elaine said dryly. I've only been a federal judge for 15 years, the chief conceded with a nod. I'll arrange it, but not today. Let things cool down first. When Chief Daniels emerged from the house, the reporters rushed forward with questions. He raised his hands for silence. There was an incident this morning involving one of our officers and federal judge Elaine Wright. The officer has been placed on administrative leave while we conduct a thorough investigation. We take this matter extremely seriously and will provide more information in the coming days. As the chief made his statement, Reynolds watched from his car, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He had always prided himself on being a good cop, on doing the right thing. But today, faced with the consequences of his unconscious biases and split-second decisions, he couldn't avoid the truth that had been revealed, not just to the world, but to himself. Inside her home, Elaine made another phone call, this time to her sister. Helen, I need you to come over, she said, her voice finally breaking. Something happened and I don't want to be alone right now. As she hung up, Elaine moved to her window and looked out at the scene unfolding on her quiet street. The neighbors gathered in concerned clusters, the news van with its camera trained on her house, the police presence that had disrupted the morning peace. In a matter of hours, her private trauma would become public record. Her name and face broadcast across news channels. But unlike so many others who had faced similar treatment, Elaine Wright had the power, position, and platform to demand change, and she intended to use every bit of it. By noon, the video had spread across social media like wildfire. Local news stations ran it on repeat, each time freezing the frame where Officer Reynolds pushed Judge Wright to the ground. National outlets picked up the story by mid-afternoon, running headlines like "Federal Judge Assaulted by Police in Her Own Neighborhood" and "Officer Knocks Down Black. Female Judge for Not Answering Questions." Elaine sat in her living room with her sister Helen, watching the coverage spread in real time. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Colleagues from the courthouse, fellow judges, civil rights attorneys, and reporters all eager to hear her side of the story. "You need to see a doctor," Helen insisted, eyeing the now purple bruise spreading across Elaine's elbow. "You hit the ground hard." "I've documented everything," Elaine replied, but she winced as she shifted position on the couch. "I'll go tomorrow." "No, today," Helen countered. "This isn't just about your health. You need medical records to back up your case." Elaine knew her sister was right. As a civil rights attorney, Helen understood the importance of documentation. "Fine, but I'm not going to the emergency room and creating a spectacle. Call Dr. Wilson and see if she can fit me in." Across town, James Reynolds sat in his kitchen staring at his phone. The department had taken his service weapon and badge, but the real punishment was happening online. His name and face were being shared alongside the video, which had already been viewed millions of times. The comments were brutal, calling for his firing, his arrest, even worse. His wife Lisa paced behind him. "You need to talk to a lawyer, James, right now." "The union will provide one," he said hollowly. "No, not a union lawyer. Your own lawyer." Lisa stopped pacing and sat across from him. "James, look at me." He raised his eyes to meet hers. "This isn't going away," she said firmly. "That woman is a federal judge. She has power, resources, and now she has public opinion on her side. You need someone whose only priority is protecting you." Reynolds nodded slowly. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "I know," Lisa said, her voice softening slightly. "But it did happen, and now we need to deal with it." At police headquarters, Chief Daniels had called an emergency meeting with his command staff. The conference room was tense as they reviewed both the body cam footage and the viral video. "The body cam confirms everything," Deputy Chief Patel said grimly after they watched it for the third time. There was no justification for the level of force used. Reynolds didn't identify himself properly, didn't clearly state why he was stopping her, and escalated immediately when she questioned him. "What was the original call about?" asked Captain Rivera. Miller consulted his notes. "A resident called about a suspicious person looking at houses. No description provided. The caller just said someone who doesn't belong in the neighborhood." "And Reynolds decided that was Judge Wright?" Rivera asked incredulously. "A woman who's lived there for 15 years? The neighborhood is 82% white, Patel noted. Judge Wright is one of only a handful of black residents." Chief Daniels rubbed his temples. "The press is going to crucify us, and they should. This is textbook racial profiling followed by excessive force." "Sir," Miller said cautiously, "we need to consider Reynolds' record. He's never had complaints of this nature before." "No documented complaints," Patel corrected. "I've already pulled his stop records for the past 3 years. The data shows a clear pattern of disproportionately stopping minority drivers and pedestrians." The room fell silent as that information sank in. "We have a serious problem," Chief Daniels finally said, "and not just with Reynolds. If we had been properly analyzing our own data, we would have caught this pattern years ago." "What's our next move?" Rivera asked. "Transparency," Daniels replied firmly. "We release the body cam footage, acknowledge the wrongdoing, and announce concrete steps we're taking to address not just this incident, but the underlying issues." "The union won't like that," Miller warned. "I don't care what the union likes," Daniels snapped. "A federal judge was assaulted by one of our officers while jogging in her own neighborhood. If we circle the wagons now, we deserve whatever comes next." By late afternoon, Dr. Wilson had confirmed that Elaine had suffered a mild sprain to her wrist and significant bruising to her hip and elbow. Nothing was broken, but the doctor documented everything meticulously, taking photos for Elaine's medical record. "You're going to be sore for at least a week," Dr. Wilson told her. "Take it easy, use ice for the swelling, and take anti-inflammatories as needed." Elaine nodded, carefully putting her shirt back on over the bandaged elbow. "Thank you for fitting me in." Of course, Dr. Wilson replied. I saw the video. It's all over social media. It happened so fast, Elaine said quietly. 1 minute I was jogging home, the next I was on the ground. Dr. Wilson sat down across from her. As your doctor and your friend, how are you really doing? Elaine had been maintaining her composure all day, focusing on the practical steps needed to address what had happened. But the simple question cracked something inside her. I feel violated, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've spent my entire career upholding the law, believing in the system despite its flaws. And then in an instant, I was just another black body that didn't belong, that needed to be controlled. Dr. Wilson reached out and squeezed her hand. What you're feeling is completely normal. Trauma affects everyone, even federal judges. Elaine nodded, quickly wiping away a tear. I keep thinking about all the people who go through this without the protection of a title, without neighbors recording videos, without the chief of police showing up at their door. What happens to them? Maybe that's where you focus your energy, Dr. Wilson suggested. This horrible thing happened to you, but you have a platform most people don't. As Elaine left the doctor's office, she found a small crowd of reporters waiting. She straightened her shoulders and walked directly to them. I'll be making a full statement tomorrow, she said clearly. For now, I'll say only this. What happened this morning was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a systemic problem that affects countless citizens who don't have the protection of a federal title. That's what we need to address. Back at police headquarters, Reynolds sat alone in a small conference room. The department psychologist had just left after an initial assessment. The union representative was due to arrive soon, but for now he had nothing but his thoughts for company. He replayed the morning's events in his mind for the 100th time. Why had he immediately seen Judge Wright as suspicious? Why had he escalated so quickly? If she had been a white woman in running clothes, would he have even stopped her? The questions made him uncomfortable, forcing him to confront aspects of himself he'd never examined closely. Reynolds had always thought of himself as one of the good cops. He treated people with respect, didn't use excessive force, followed the rules. Or at least that's what he had believed about himself until today. His phone buzzed with a text from his teenage daughter. Dad, is that you in the video everyone's sharing? Please tell me it's not. Reynolds felt sick. He couldn't bring himself to respond. The door opened and Chief Daniels walked in. Reynolds immediately stood up. Sit down, Daniels said, taking the chair across from him. Sir, I want to explain. Reynolds began. I've seen the videos, Reynolds, both the body cam and the neighbor's recording. There's nothing to explain. Daniels leaned forward. I've been a cop for 38 years. I've seen good officers make bad decisions in split seconds. But what happened this morning wasn't a split-second decision. It was a series of choices, each one worse than the last. Reynolds stared at the table. What happens now? You're suspended without pay pending investigation. The department will make a public statement acknowledging that your actions were wrong and unjustified. Judge Wright has requested a meeting with you, which I've agreed to arrange once things settle down. Daniels paused. And I suggest you find yourself a good lawyer. Am I being charged? Reynolds asked, his voice hollow. That decision hasn't been made yet, Daniels replied, but I wouldn't rule it out. After the chief left, Reynolds remained seated, trying to process everything. The career he had built over 12 years was crumbling around him. His family was being dragged into a national controversy, and somewhere across town, a woman was nursing injuries he had caused for no justifiable reason. For the first time, Reynolds allowed himself to really see Judge Wright as a person, not as a suspect, not as a judge who could ruin him, but as a human being who had been going about her day until he had violated her sense of safety and dignity. The realization brought a wave of shame unlike anything he had ever experienced. By evening, the story had reached the governor's office. The mayor had already issued a statement expressing deep concern and promising a thorough investigation. Civil rights organizations were calling for systemic reforms in the police department. Social media was ablaze with discussions about racial profiling, police accountability, and privilege. In her home, Elaine sat with Helen and 3 close friends who had come over for support. They had ordered food that remained largely uneaten. The conversation moved between practical discussions about legal strategy and deeper reflections on the experience. I keep thinking about how differently this could have gone, said Michael, Elaine's colleague from the federal court. If you hadn't been a judge, if there hadn't been witnesses with cameras, Or if he had escalated further, added Patricia, a law professor and longtime friend. We've all seen how these encounters can end. Elaine nodded, the weight of that reality settling over the room. That's why this can't just be about me or Officer Reynolds. It has to be about changing the system that makes these encounters possible in the first place. What exactly do you want to happen? Helen asked. Beyond the obvious consequences for this specific officer? Elaine considered the question carefully. I want meaningful reform, not just sensitivity training or body cameras, but real accountability. I want data collection and analysis that flags problematic patterns before they lead to incidents like this. I want police leadership that proactively addresses bias instead of reacting to crises. She looked around at the concerned faces of her friends. And I want to use what happened to me to help people who don't have my resources or platform. This has to be about more than just my case. As night fell, both Elaine and Reynolds lay awake in their respective homes. Their lives now connected by a brief but consequential encounter. Neither had anticipated that morning. Both knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges as the story continued to unfold. Both understood that what had happened in those few minutes would have ramifications far beyond themselves. For Elaine, the path forward was clear, if difficult. For Reynolds, the future had never looked more uncertain. And for the community watching this story unfold, the familiar pattern of outrage, promises, and eventual forgetfulness was being challenged by the uncommon position of the woman who had been knocked to the ground, a federal judge unwilling to let the system return to business as usual. 3 days after the incident, the police department released Officer Reynolds' body camera footage to the public. The unedited video showed the entire encounter from Reynolds' perspective, how he had spotted Judge Wright jogging, immediately turned his car around to follow her, and approached with an authoritative stance before she had done anything suspicious. The audio captured his increasingly hostile tone as Judge Wright calmly questioned his basis for stopping her. Most damning was the clear moment when he pushed her to the ground with force that was visibly unnecessary. The footage only intensified public outrage. Protests formed outside police headquarters, with hundreds of people carrying signs reading "Justice for Judge Wright" and "Who polices the police?" Community leaders called for systematic reforms. The mayor announced the formation of a special commission to review police practices. In her chambers at the federal courthouse, Elaine met with her legal team. Though she had returned to work, the bruises on her body were still tender reminders of what had happened. "The department has officially apologized," said Anthony, her lead attorney. "They've acknowledged the stop was unjustified and the use of force excessive. Chief Daniels has suspended Reynolds without pay pending the completion of their internal investigation." "That's a start," Elaine replied, "but not enough." She pushed a folder across her desk. "I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division requesting a pattern or practice investigation of the entire department." Her team exchanged glances. "That's a significant escalation, Grace," another attorney noted. "Are you sure you want to take it that far?" "This isn't about retribution against one officer," Elaine said firmly. "The data Anthony obtained shows that Reynolds has a history of disproportionately stopping people of color. And he's not the only one. The entire department has patterns that need to be addressed." "The police union is already pushing back," Anthony warned. "They're saying this was an isolated incident, that Reynolds has an otherwise clean record." "Then they haven't been paying attention," Elaine countered. "Or they've been deliberately ignoring the problem. Either way, it needs to change." She pulled up a spreadsheet on her computer. "Look at these numbers. Black residents make up 8% of Oak Ridge but account for 42% of all pedestrian stops. Hispanic residents are 12% of the population but 37% of the stops. The pattern is clear and has been for years. What exactly do you want to come from this?" Grace asked. Elaine leaned back in her chair, wincing slightly at the pain in her hip. "I want a consent decree. I want court-enforceable reforms with independent monitoring. I want data collection, de-escalation training, and real accountability. And I want it to be a model that other departments can follow." Across town, James Reynolds sat in his attorney's office. The lawyer, Paul Warner, was reviewing the list of potential charges Reynolds might face. "The department is clearly preparing to make you the scapegoat," Warner said. "The chief's public statement all but admitted wrongdoing on your part." "Because I did wrong," Reynolds said quietly. "I've watched that video 100 times now. I can't defend what I did, Warner sighed. James, my job is to defend you, not to help you self-incriminate. The union is willing to stand behind you. They'll argue that you were following protocol for a suspicious person call. Reynolds shook his head. But I wasn't. There was no description of a suspicious person. Just a vague call about someone who didn't belong. I saw a black woman running in an affluent neighborhood and decided she was the suspicious person. He looked up at his lawyer. How do I defend that? You don't have to defend your internal thought process, Warner insisted. Just your actions based on the information you had at the time. And what information was that? Reynolds challenged. That someone who didn't match my mental image of who belonged in that neighborhood was jogging? That when she questioned my authority, it made me angry? He ran his hands over his face. I've spent the last 3 days really looking at my record. I've stopped more people of color than white people, even though this is a predominantly white area. What does that say about me? Warner studied his client. This kind of self-reflection, while perhaps personally valuable, is not helpful to your legal defense. We need to focus on limiting the damage to your career and keeping you out of criminal court. I want to meet with her, Reynolds said suddenly. With Judge Wright? Absolutely not, Warner replied firmly. Any meeting with the victim at this point could be legally disastrous. She requested to meet with me, Reynolds said. The chief told me. And I'm telling you it's a terrible idea, Warner countered. Whatever she wants from that meeting, it won't help your case. Reynolds was silent for a moment. Maybe I don't care about my case anymore. Maybe I care about doing the right thing. The next day, a community meeting was held at the local high school. The gymnasium was packed with residents, reporters, police officials, and community leaders. Chief Daniels sat at a table on the stage alongside the mayor and 3 community representatives. Judge Wright had been invited but had declined to attend, preferring to let the community speak without her presence shifting the focus. We're here tonight because what happened? I've written this letter a dozen times and thrown each version away. No words seem adequate for what I did to you. I violated your rights, your dignity, and your safety. There is no excuse or justification. I've spent the past week examining my record and my conscience. The truth is painful but necessary. I treated you differently because of your race. It wasn't a conscious decision, but the outcome was the same. I understand if you never want to meet with me, but if you still wish to, I am ready to listen and learn, not to defend myself or save my job, but because I need to face the consequences of my actions and the biases that drove them. Whatever happens with my career or the legal proceedings against me, I want you to know that you have changed me. I only wish it hadn't come at such a cost to you. With deepest regrets, James Reynolds. Elaine read the letter twice, then set it aside. She had requested this meeting not for Reynolds's benefit, but because she believed it was necessary for real change, both in him and in the system. She picked up her phone and called Chief Daniels. I'm ready to meet with Officer Reynolds. Tomorrow in my chambers. No lawyers, no union representatives. Just the 3 of us. Are you sure that's wise? Daniels asked. No, Elaine admitted. But it's necessary. The following afternoon, Reynolds arrived at the federal courthouse. He had never entered the building as anything but a police officer, usually to testify in cases. Now he passed through security as a civilian, keenly aware of the curious glances from staff who recognized him from the news. Chief Daniels met him in the lobby. Judge Wright has set ground rules for this meeting. You are there to listen first. She will tell you when you may speak. If at any point she asks you to leave, you will do so immediately without question. Understood? Reynolds nodded. Yes, sir. They rode the elevator in silence. When they reached Judge Wright's chambers, her clerk showed them in without a word. Elaine sat behind her desk, her posture perfect despite the lingering pain in her hip. She gestured to the chairs across from her. Officer Reynolds, she said evenly, I received your letter. Reynolds met her eyes briefly, then looked down. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Your Honor. I didn't do it for you, Elaine said plainly. I did it because what happened between us is bigger than either of us. It's about patterns and systems that need to change. She opened a folder on her desk. Before we discuss anything else, I want you to see something. She handed him several sheets of paper. This is data from your own stops over the past 3 years, broken down by race, reason for stop, and outcome. Reynolds looked at the numbers, his face growing pale. The disparity was stark. He had stopped Black and Hispanic residents at rates far exceeding their percentage of the population. Did you know? Elaine asked. Reynolds shook his head slowly. No, I never looked at it this way. I just thought I was doing my job. That's the problem, Elaine said. The system doesn't require you to look at these patterns. It doesn't force you to confront the biases influencing your decisions. She leaned forward. But I am asking you to look now. Really look, and then tell me what you see. As Reynolds studied the data, truly seeing the pattern of his actions for the first time, the weight of understanding began to settle on his shoulders. This meeting wasn't just about one incident on a sunny morning. It was about a reckoning with himself, with his profession, and with a system that had allowed these patterns to continue unchallenged for far too long. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning when Officer Reynolds knocked Judge Wright to the ground. The bruises on her body had long since healed, but the impact of that day continued to ripple through the community and beyond. On a crisp autumn morning, Elaine stood at the podium in the police academy's main auditorium. Before her sat 30 police officers, some veterans, others new recruits, all part of the department's newly established bias awareness training program that she had helped design. Law enforcement is not just about enforcing laws, she told them. It's about protecting the dignity and rights of every person in the community you serve. The moment you forget that, you've failed at your most fundamental duty. Among the officers in the front row sat James Reynolds. He was no longer in uniform. His suspension had eventually led to his resignation from the force, but he wasn't there as a spectator either. Following the meeting in Elaine's chambers 6 months earlier, Reynolds had made a decision that surprised many. Rather than fighting to save his job, he had chosen to become part of the solution. Today you'll hear from someone whose experience might challenge you, Elaine continued. His story is difficult to tell and perhaps even more difficult to hear. But growth often begins with discomfort. She stepped aside and Reynolds took her place at the podium. The room was silent as officers watched their former colleague adjust the microphone. 6 months ago, I thought I was one of the good cops, he began, his voice steady but humble. I believed I treated everyone fairly. I would have sworn under oath that I didn't see color when I did my job. He paused. I was wrong. Reynolds described the morning he encountered Judge Wright, speaking with unflinching honesty about his assumptions and reactions. He shared the data analysis that had forced him to confront his pattern of disproportionately stopping people of color. Most importantly, he talked about the journey of self-examination that had followed. The hardest part wasn't losing my badge, he admitted. It was losing the story I told myself about who I was. Accepting that good intentions aren't enough when our unconscious biases are guiding our actions. As he spoke, Elaine watched the faces of the officers in the room. Some were defensive, arms crossed and jaws tight. Others appeared thoughtful, perhaps seeing aspects of their own behavior reflected in Reynolds' account. A few nodded in recognition, already aware of the problems he described. This training session was just one component of the comprehensive reforms that had been implemented since the incident. After the Department of Justice had launched its investigation into the police department, the city had entered into a consent decree, a court-enforceable agreement requiring specific changes in policies and practices. The changes included mandatory review of stop data for racial disparities, body cameras for all officers, revised protocols for suspicious person calls, community oversight of complaint investigations, and extensive training on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. Every officer's stop records were now regularly analyzed for patterns that might indicate biased policing. When the session ended, Reynolds approached Elaine as the officers filed out. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this, he said. I know many people thought you should have pushed for criminal charges against me. Criminal charges wouldn't have addressed the real problem, Elaine replied. The system needed to change, not just punish one officer. They walked together toward the exit, an unlikely partnership that had formed in the aftermath of trauma. Though they would never be friends, they had developed a working relationship built on a shared commitment to preventing similar incidents in the future. How's the legal clinic coming along? Reynolds asked. In the months following the incident, Elaine had established a legal clinic that provided free representation to victims of racial profiling and police misconduct. The clinic, staffed by volunteer attorneys and law students, had already taken on dozens of cases that might otherwise have gone unaddressed. We're making progress, Elaine said. We just helped a young man who was wrongfully detained for matching the description of a suspect. Sound familiar? Reynolds nodded, understanding the reference to the excuse he had used when stopping her. And your speaking engagements? Booked solid for the next 3 months, she replied. Police departments, law schools, community organizations. People want to have these conversations now. What had happened to Judge Wright had catalyzed long overdue discussions about policing practices across the country. Her position and eloquence, combined with the undeniable video evidence, had made it impossible for people to dismiss or ignore the issue as they often had in the past. That afternoon, Elaine sat in her chambers reviewing a case when her clerk knocked on the door. Judge Wright, your 3 o'clock is here. Elaine checked her watch. Send them in. The door opened to reveal Zoe Taylor, a 16-year-old black girl accompanied by her mother. Elaine had met Zoe at a community forum 2 months earlier. The teenager had approached her afterward, sharing her dream of becoming a judge someday. Thank you for making time for us, Judge Wright, Mrs. Taylor said as they took seats across from Elaine's desk. I'm always happy to meet with young people interested in the law, Elaine replied with a warm smile. Especially ones as bright as Zoe. Zoe sat up straighter, clearly nervous but determined. I have so many questions about law school and becoming a judge. After everything that happened to you, I thought maybe you'd tell me it's not worth it. But instead, you've done even more to make things better. The law is imperfect because it's created and enforced by imperfect people, Elaine said. But that's exactly why we need bright, compassionate young people like you to be part of the system. Change happens from both outside and inside. For the next hour, Elaine answered Zoe's questions about education, career paths, and the challenges of being a black woman in the judiciary. She arranged for Zoe to observe court proceedings and connected her with a mentorship program for aspiring legal professionals. As the Taylors were leaving, Zoe turned back. When that officer pushed you down, did you ever think something good could come from it? Elaine considered the question carefully. No, not in that moment. I felt angry, humiliated, and violated. But I did believe I could use what happened to create change. Sometimes our worst experiences give us our greatest purpose. That evening, James Reynolds sat at his kitchen table helping his teenage daughter with her homework. After resigning from the police force, he had taken a position with a nonprofit organization focused on police reform. The pay was lower, but the work gave him purpose. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Department of Justice expands investigation to 3 more police departments following Oak Ridge model. He clicked on the article, which mentioned Judge Wright's case as the catalyst for the broader accountability measures now being implemented elsewhere. Dad? His daughter's voice pulled him back to the present. Are you okay? Reynolds set down his phone. Yeah, just reading some news. His daughter hesitated, then asked the question she'd been holding back for months. Do you ever wish you could go back to before everything happened? Reynolds thought about the comfort of his old life. The simplicity of believing he was doing everything right. The security of his identity as a good cop. Then he thought about the man he had been becoming without realizing it, someone whose unconscious biases were causing real harm. No, he answered honestly. I wish I hadn't hurt Judge Wright. I wish I had recognized my biases sooner, but I don't wish to go back to not knowing. Later that night, Elaine stood on her porch enjoying the evening air. She still felt a momentary tension whenever a police car drove through her neighborhood, a visceral reminder of trauma that might never fully fade. But she no longer felt powerless in those moments. Her phone rang. It was Anthony, her lead attorney on the consent decree monitoring team. Just got the first quarterly report, he said. Pedestrian stops are down 38% overall, and the racial disparity in stops has decreased by over 40%. That's encouraging, Elaine replied. What about complaint investigations? The Civilian Review Board is working well. 3 officers have been disciplined based on their recommendations, and the chief actually implemented all their suggested policy changes. After finishing the call, Elaine remained on her porch reflecting on how far things had come. The path to change had not been easy or straightforward. There had been resistance from the police union, criticism from those who thought she was either too harsh or not harsh enough, and the emotional toll of repeatedly recounting her experience. But there had also been progress, tangible, measurable improvements in how policing was conducted in her community. More importantly, there was a new willingness to acknowledge problems that had been ignored for too long. The next morning, Elaine prepared for her regular jog. She still ran the same route through her neighborhood, refusing to let fear change her routine. As she stretched on her porch, a patrol car drove slowly past her house. The officer inside raised his hand in a respectful wave which Elaine returned. It was a small gesture, but it represented something significant: recognition. Not just of her title or position, but of her humanity and her rightful place in her own community. As she began her run, Elaine reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. A single incident had become a case study had become a consent decree, and a consent decree was becoming a model for change elsewhere. Most importantly, people who had long felt voiceless were now being heard. The work was far from finished. Real change would require ongoing vigilance, advocacy, and difficult conversations. There would be setbacks and resistance alongside the progress, but Elaine was committed to the long path ahead, using her position to ensure that what had happened to her would lead to lasting improvement. In courtrooms and community centers, in police academies and legal clinics, the ripple effects continued to spread. One moment of injustice, confronted with courage and determination, had opened doors that had long remained closed. As Elaine rounded the corner onto her street, completing her route, she saw a young black family moving into a house a few doors down. They waved as she passed, and she stopped to welcome them to the neighborhood. "We've heard this is a good community," the father said. "It's getting better," Elaine replied with a smile. "We're working on it together."